Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to start something new called Histaklut Pnimit, which literally translates into an inner look or a deeper look. And what we're going to do in this section is, it's going to sound a little bit like review sometimes, which review is always good. But within the review, we're going to go deeper into every topic we've covered so far. Let's begin. Rashit kol tzrichim ladat, this is Rav Ashlag writing, that before everything you need to know, שבמקום שיש לנו עסק עם עניינים רוחניים, everywhere where we're dealing with spiritual things, המופשטים מזמן, מקום ותנועה, that are separate or disrobed from time, space, and motion, ואצל עם אלוקיות, הרי אין לנו את המילות להגות ולהתבטא על ידיהן, meaning anytime we're dealing with godly things, spiritual things, whatever you'd like to call it, we don't have the words to fully cover or understand these concepts. שהרי כל אוצר המילות שלנו הוא לקוח מהרגשי החושים המדומים. Our entire dictionary of words, our entire reservoir of words are taken, like our human language, are taken from the imaginative or imagined senses. And I want to drive home that point that Rav Ashlag here is calling, sight, hearing, touch, taste, smell, like all the different senses that we have. He's calling them imagined or imaginative, meaning that they don't grasp reality, because reality is what's happening above. We are in this physical world of illusion. And how can we use those in a place where sense or imagination doesn't rule there? In the spiritual worlds, this illusion, this physical illusion falls apart. Kila mashal, for example, or as a metaphor, even if you take the most esoteric or the least physical word that we have in our language, for example, light. הרי היא גם כן מדומה ומושאלת מן אור השמש, או אור מורגש של נחת רוח וכדומה. When we use the word light, the actual word, the definition is talking about the light of the sun, or the light from a light bulb, or maybe even that you feel light, that you feel nice, it feels good, but it's still related to physical things. אם כן, איך יתקן להתבטא עמהן בענייני אלוקות, אשר ודאי לא יציעו למעיין שום דבר אמת. So how can we use these words to talk about spiritual things that these words won't help the person who's studying us, won't help us understand anything about the truth. ואין צריך לומר במקום שצריכים לגלות על ידי המילות ההן. And you don't need to say that in a place where we need to reveal through these words, בכתב על ספר, so we have to reveal these words, meaning we have to study this thing through our words, because we don't have another way to study it, through writing on a book, בענייני משא ומתן בחוכמה, in the aspects or topics of exchange with wisdom, which we'll get into that later. כנהוג במחקרי כל חוכמה, like is the tradition in every type of investigative wisdom. Again, we'll get into it. אשר אז אם נכשלים, there if they fail, אפילו במילה אחת בלתי מוצלחת למטרתה. So when we're looking through, when we're investigating through our language, which is the best we can do, if we make a single mistake, one word off, תכף יתבלבל המעיין ולא ימצא ידיו ורגליו בכל העניין כולו. The person will become confused to the point where within this topic they won't know where the hands and their feet are. What Rav Ashlag is trying to say is that because we don't have a proper vehicle to understand the spiritual world above, we have to be extremely exact, and we have to be very careful, because if a little bit we go off what the truth is, everything will become confused. ולפיכך, בחרו להם חכמי הקבלה שפה מיוחדת. Therefore, the wise men of Kabbalah, the wise men of this knowledge, chose for themselves a special language. What's this language? שאפשר לכנותה שפת הענפים, which we're going to call the language of branches. What do we mean? להיות שאין לנו שום מהות או הנהגה של איזו מהות בעולם הזה, since we don't have any way to physically contact or observe the spiritual worlds from this world, שלא תהיה נמשכת משורשה שבעולם העליון. So we also don't have anything in this world that doesn't have a root in the spiritual world. Meaning, it's true that we can't, as humans, fully understand the spiritual world because we're too far separated, but everything that happens, every existence in this world, in this physical world, has its root in the spiritual world. ואדרבה, התחלת כל ישות שבעולם הזה, the beginning of every identity in this world, הנה היא מתחילה מהעולם העליון, started in the upper world. ואחר כך משתרשלת לעולם הזה, and then it spread, it came here. לפי כך מצאו להם החכמים שפה מכונה בלי תורח. So the wise men of Kabbalah, the Ari, Rav Ashlag, all the people that came before us, they found this language that takes away the that helps us with how hard it is to try and relate to the spiritual worlds through physical examples. שיוכלו למוסר על ידי איש לרעהו את השגתם, that they're able to pass on from generation to generation their understanding, whether it's on a book, whether it's teacher to student down the line. כי לקחו להם את שמות הענפים שבעולם הזה. They took the names of the branches that we have in this world. We're not talking about physical tree branches right now. אשר כל שם מבאר את עצמו, כמורה באצבע על שורשו העליון, אשר במערכת העולמות העליונים. What do we mean by branch here? Every physical thing has its root in the spiritual world. So if you want to imagine all of existence, all of creation is one big tree, then the outermost tip of the branches would be the most physical things, our world, and where the roots are the deepest would be the most spiritual place, the essence. And then along the way you have the whole spectrum. You have the different worlds until we get to the physical one. So the way that we're going to talk about spirituality is based on what we can see in the branches. We're going to go back, we're going to reverse engineer the whole process down to the roots. But remember, every name that we give something in a spiritual realm don't try and compare it to physical things. It's just the best we can do with our language. ובזה תנוח דעתך, במה שתמצא לרוב בספרי הקבלה, ביטויים מטמאים. And this way your mind will rest. When you see all these seemingly weird things that it says in books of Kabbalah, וגם זרים לפעמים לרוח האנושי, which are even sometimes contradictory to natural human intuition. והוא כי אחר שכבר בחרו להם שפה זו להתבטא על ידיה, because now that they've chosen this language, לנו שפת ענפים, the language of branches, אם כן, איך אפשר להם להשמיט על דרכם איזה ענף בלי להשתמש עמו מחמת נחיתות הדרגה שלו, שלא לבטא על ידיו את המושכל הרצוי. So how can they, now that they're using this language of branches, how can they use this name, the name of this branch, and talk about something from the root level? בבית שלא נמצא בעולמנו איזה ענף אחר שיקחו אותו בתמורתו. How can they not exchange different branches for each other, the names of different things for each other? כי כמו ששתי שעירות אינן יונקות מנקב אחד. So it's saying just like there's two goats don't suckle from one female goat. כי אין לנו בית ענפים שיתייחסו אל שורש אחד. We don't have two branches in this world that talk about the same thing in the spiritual world. Every branch that we're going to talk about here, whether we use the word light or space, time, motion, all of these things are branches that we're using to go and talk about spiritual concepts. And every single one of them, it's a 1-to-1 ratio. We don't have two branches here that go back to one source. ואף גם זאת לא יתקן, להעביד את דבר החוכמה המחויב אל הביטוי הנחות הדרגה ההוא, ולא עוד, כי העבידה ההיא תגרום פגם ובלבול גדול בכל מרחבי החוכמה. So, furthermore, what we have to be careful is not to lose or to confuse these words of wisdom, meaning we have to be very careful, word for word, translate as best as possible. Because if we don't, it'll create a big confusion. להיות שאין לנו עוד חוכמה בכל חוכמות העולם, until the point where we won't know anything about anything in the world. שיהיו העניינים כל כך משולבים זה בזה, because everything will be so interconnected and confused. בדרך סיבה מסובב גורם ונמשך, in the ways of the cause and effects, drawer and receiver, drawer and that which is drawn. כמו חוכמת הקבלה, like in the wisdom of Kabbalah, שהעניינים מלוכדים וקשורים זה בזה, מראשה עד סופה, where everything is connected from the beginning to the end. So what we're saying here is we don't want to use the way that we talk about Kabbalah in all of the other fields of knowledge or everything else that we study. The language that we use for Kabbalah is specific for Kabbalah, for talking about spiritual things. And the way that everything is interconnected and everything connects to everything else in Kabbalah doesn't necessarily work across all fields of knowledge. Here, in Kabbalah and spiritual things, everything is connected from beginning to end. But if we try to do that in other fields, things would get very confused. ולפיכך אין כאן חירות רצון להחליף ולהמיר בין הכינויים הללו רע בטוב. And that's why we don't have the freedom here to change between the different terms that we have or between good and bad. אלא מוכרחים להביא תמיד בדיוק אותו הענף המורם באצבע על שורשו העליון. So we have to always use the correct term for the correct concept. וגם נרחיב בו הדיבור עד להמציא ההגדרה המדויקת לעיני המשכילים המעיינים. And whenever we do talk about a branch, we have to widen our perspective about it, meaning talk about every aspect of it until we know the exact measure and limits of what branch we're talking about. So let's say we're talking about Olam Hatzilut. We have to talk about every aspect of Olam Hatzilut until we know exactly where it begins, where it ends, if it begins or it ends, and until we know everything about it before we can move on. Because if we're not 100% clear, we're going to get lost. אמנם כן, אותם שעוד לא נפקחו עיניהם במראות השמיים, those that have not yet had their eyes opened with the visions of the heavens, ועדיין אין להם אותה הבקיאות של יחסי ענפי העולם הזה, and they still are not familiar with these branches of this world, אל שורשיהם בעולמות עליונים, they're not familiar with the branches connection back to the spiritual. הם הנמצאים כאן כעיוורים מגוששים קיר. They're like blind people that are wandering in the dark and like feeling along a wall. כי לא יבינו אף מילה אחת כמשמע אמיתי. They will not understand a single word the way it's supposed to be understood, the way it's truly supposed to be understood. What does that mean? Meaning, without this knowledge, without the knowledge of the root of everything, how everything began, everything that comes out of it, a person cannot possibly understand properly. שהרי כל מילה היא שם של איזה ענף ביחס שורשו. Every word that we're going to use here, every term, is the name of a branch with respect to its source. זולת אם שיקבלו הפירוש מפי חכם מובהק. So if they get the explanation from some wise man, from someone who understands this, הממציא את עצמו להסביר העניין בשפה מדוברת, that decides on his own to use a regular spoken language to talk about this, שהוא בהכרח כמו מעתיק מלשון אל לשון, which is like translating from one language to another. דהיינו משפת הענפים לשפה מדוברת, from the language of branches to spoken word. כי אז יוכל להסביר את המושג הרוחני איכשהו. So the only way for people who aren't familiar themselves with how all of this works is to hear it from someone who does understand it, and that on that person is the responsibility to translate well from the language of branches to the spoken word. וזהו שתלכתי בביאורי זה, and Rav Ashlag is saying here that my effort, all of my work in these explanations, להסביר את 10 הספירות, is to explain the 10 ספירות, the 10 spiritual levels, כפי שהראה לנו החכם האלוקי אריז"ל, according to that which the Ari wrote, על פי טהרתן הרוחנית, based on their spiritual purity, המופשטות בכל מושגים המוחשאים, that are spread through all things, everything that you can observe, the 10 ספירות are there, spread throughout. באופן שיוכל כל מתחיל לגשת אל החוכמה, so that any beginner can approach this knowledge, בלי להיכשל בשום הגשמה וטעות, without failing or making a mistake anywhere. אשר עם הבנת 10 הספירות האלו, with this understanding of the 10 ספירות, יפתח הפתח גם להסתכל ולדעת, an opening will be created also to know and to see, איך להבין ביתר העניינים בחוכמה הזאת, how to understand all the other topics in this knowledge. So that was the intro to this deeper look. דע, כי טרם שנצלו הניצלים, before, so we're quoting the Ari again, before the emanated were emanated, before all the emanated things were emanated, ונבראו נבראים, and the created things were created, היה אור עליון פשוט, ממלא כל המציאות וכו'. There was an upper simple light, like we've mentioned before, that was filling all of existence. הדברים הללו צריכים ביור. We need to explain these things. You're probably thinking right now, but we just spent several classes explaining these things, so what do we need this for? Again, a lot of this is going to sound a little bit like review, but we're going to go, every topic that we did, we're going to take it and open it up to go even deeper. Before the worlds were emanated, how was there even the concept of a space for existence to exist? That this simple light was filling. So before anything existed, how did the space for something to fill exist? And also with this idea of wanting to contract so that the light can come out and do its action. What's with this desire? Because it seems from the language of the book that there was already some sort of lack. God forbid. There was no lack in the endless, but it seems like there was, because if there was no lack, then why would there be a desire to contract and then for all of this to happen? Remember, because all of this it didn't happen like, the Big Bang. A lot of times I hear people say, and I used to think this as well, the Big Bang is very similar to the Tzimtzum. We had big, just light filling everything, tiny point, then this tiny point rapidly expanded and created everything. I used to think that was a good analogy. I no longer do because of this. Everything about the Tzimtzum, the Or Ein Sof, everything that we've been studying so far was with a plan in mind. It didn't just happen. It was on purpose. So if it was on purpose, then it seems from the language of the book that there was something missing, that the light wanted something more, the vessel wanted something more that wasn't there. God forbid one should think like that, but it seems like that. So we have to explain why it's not like that. Also this midpoint that we talked about, which is where the contraction happened, it's a big wonder. What's so amazing about this midpoint? דהה כבר אמר שאין שם ראש וסוף. We already said there's no beginning or end. ואם כן, איך יש אמצע? How do we know this? How is there a middle if there's no beginning and end? Seems like a good question to me. אמנם כן, הדברים הללו עמוקים מיני ים, ועל כן אני מוכרח להעריך בביאורים. So, Rav Ashlag is saying that these things, the answers to these things is deeper than the depths of the sea, and therefore we have to explain it. Let's go to the first topic. אין דבר בכל המציאות שלא יהיה כלול באינסוף. המושגים ההפוכים אצלנו כלולים בו יתברך בסוד אחד יחיד ומיוחד. There is no thing in existence that isn't included in the endless. Even the opposites, what we see as opposites, good and bad, full, empty, all of these things that we see as opposites are actually both included. They're together in the endless, in the endless, and in the essence of the Creator, in the secret of Echad Yachid Umeyuchad. He is one, He is unique, He is one, He is alone, and He is unique. That's the translation of the words Echad Yachid Umeyuchad. But we're going to go deeper now. Da she'en lecha shum mahut shel yeshut ba'olam. There is no existence, there is no identity in the world. Hen min hamuchshot lechoshim shelanu, whether it's observable by our senses, ven min hamuskalot ba'en hasechel shelanu, or whether it's not really observable by our senses, but our mind's eye can see it. Sheno kalol b'borei yitbarach, which isn't already included in the Creator. Deha kulam nimshachin lanu hemeno yitbarach, because they all come to us. Every idea you've ever had, every weird dream you ever had, everything you can see, everything you can't see, all come to us through the Creator. Uklum yesh lecha noten ma shelo yiyeh bo, and there isn't anything that can give of itself what it doesn't already have. V'inyan zeh kvar mevoar heitev basfarim, and this idea has already been explained well in the books of Kabbalah. Omnam tzarich lavin, but we have to understand she'otam hamusagim, that these ideas shem nifradim etzlenu, that seem separate to us, o hafuchim, or opposite, good, bad, full, empty, again, big, small, all these ideas or concepts that we see as separate or as opposites, adat ma musag ha-chokhmah nivchan be'efresh min musag ha-metikut, through this idea that there's the concept of wisdom and the concept of sweetening, which we'll get into. Shechokhmah v'metikut bet musagim nivdalim hen zu mizu. So wisdom and sweetening or sweetness are two concepts that are separate from each other, and we'll get into the definition specifically of chokhmah and metikut, but the short version is like this. Chokhmah is the light of wisdom, which is, if you don't remember, please go back and watch that video. The stronger light, where if a vessel receiving the light of wisdom isn't big enough or cannot hold the light of wisdom that's coming, it looks like judgment. So it burns the vessel. Metikut is the sweetening of that judgment, which is the idea of Olde Chasadim, the light of mercy. So Olde Chokhmah, the light of wisdom, by itself, if we don't have the right vessel, can seem like judgment. And then the way to sweeten it, the way to make it in a way that the vessel can receive it, is to add in Olde Chasadim, the light of mercy. So these two concepts, light of wisdom, light of mercy, seem separate to us because, how do we see judgment? Bad things are happening in the world. COVID, hurricanes, earthquakes. These all seem like bad things in their physical manifestation. And then there are the things that we see as good. People get saved from stuff. People find cures for things. We see those things as good. But we see those two things as opposites in our world. וכן מושג הפועל הוא ודאי בהפרש מן מושג הפעולה. What else do we see as separate? The entity doing something and the action itself we see as separate. שהפועל ופעולתו בהכרח בית מושגים נבדלים זה מזה, because logically from our point of view in this world, me and the action I'm doing by picking this up, the action is separate from me. The action is not part of me. I did it, but it's not part of my identity. מכל שכן, המושגים ההפוכים, וכמו המתיקות והמרירות כדומה, so, and even more so, these opposites, the sweet and bitter, good and bad, הן נבחנות ודאי כל אחת לעצמה, they all have their own definitions, they all seem separate. אמנם אצלו יתברך, but by the Creator, יהיו החוכמה והתענוג ומתיקות וחריפות ופעולה ופועל, the wisdom and enjoyment and sweetness and bitter and spicy and the person doing the action or the entity doing the action and the action itself, וכדומה מן הצורות המשנות וההפוכות, and everything else that we see as separate or opposite, כל זה כלול כאחד באורו הפשוט. Everything is included as one. It's not that it's all there. It's all there as if it's the same thing in this upper simple light, in the endless. בלי שום הכר והבדל ביניהם כלל, without being able to recognize any sort of separation between them. אלא במושג אחד יחיד ומיוחד, they are in this idea of one, alone, and unique. אחד, so now we're going to define these terms. אחד, so one, oneness, מורה שהוא בהשוואת אחד, is telling us that everything is equal. יחיד, alone, מורה על הנמשך ממנו, שגם כל אלו הריבועים המה אצלו יתברך בצורת יחיד, כמו עצמותו יתברך. So, even when the light is drawn from the endless, we have the endless light now, everything is still included there. Meaning it's all still in one uniqueness, all together. In one singularity. ומיוחד and unique, מורה הגם שהוא פועל ריבוי הפעולות, אומנם כוח אחד פועל כל אלה. So, what's unique about this? This endless does all of these actions. Even though, so all these actions come from, all these things happen from one force, from one energy. וכולן חוזרות ושבות ומתייחדות בצורת יחיד. And they all return to this idea of a singularity. שהצורה היחידה הזו בולעת כל הצורות המתראות בפעולותיו. That this singular entity, this entity of singular form, swallows all the other forms that are seen through its actions. והוא עניין דק מאוד, בלאו כל מוחה סביל דק. And it's this idea of something very narrow, and not every mind is capable of understanding it. וכן פירש לנו הרמב"ן ז"ל. And that's why Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, or Nachmanides for my English speakers, explained to us, על עניין אחדותו יתברך בסוד אחד, יחיד ומיוחד. So, Ramban, or Nachmanides, explained to us this idea of אחד יחיד ומיוחד. וזהו לשונו, and this is what he said, בפירושו על ספר יצירה, this is what Ramban wrote an explanation of a book called Sefer Yetzirah, and this is what he wrote there. יש הפרש מן אחד ויחיד ומיוחד. There is a difference between one, singular, and unique. What's the difference? שם מתפרש, כשהוא מתייחד לפועל בכוח אחד, נקרא מיוחד. When the Creator becomes unique in order to do a singular action, he's called unique. What does that mean? Meaning, when the Creator is focusing on one aspect, for example, it's written about the splitting of the sea that Elohim did it. Elohim is one of the names of God. So that one action, through that one aspect of God, would be under the category of miyuchad. וכשהוא מתחלק לפעול פעולתו, and when he divides himself to do all these things, כל חלק שממנו נקרא יחיד. Every single piece is called singular. וכשהוא בהשוואה אחת נקרא אחד. And when it's all equal, he's called one. על כן לשונו הזך. פירוש מתייחד לפעול בכוח אחד. So that was still a little bit esoteric, a little bit hard to understand. So Rav Ashlag helps us understand further. מתייחד לפעול בכוח אחד. He becomes unique in order to do this one action. What does that mean? רצונו לומר שפועל להיטב קרוי לייחודו. When the action seems to have a good result, when God does something that we see as good, that's the aspect of unique. Because God does these unique miracles that are objectively good for everyone. Resurrection of the dead, freeing people from slavery, saving people from certain death. All those things, I think everyone would agree, seem good. So when God does those actions, that's the aspect of uniqueness. And when he divides to do all of his actions, what does that mean? That the actions are different from one another. How? When we observe that things are happening and some of them look good and some of them look bad, we see a separation between them. אז נקרא יחיד, מפני שלכל פעולותיו המשונות יש להן תוצאה יחידה להיטב. And this is the hardest one for most people to swallow. When things happen, whether we see them as either good or bad, each one of them is called yachid. They're called singular. Why? Because they're all for a singular purpose. Whether we see it as good or bad, it doesn't matter. They're all for a singular purpose. What is that purpose? To do good. So the end of the road of whatever is happening is always for the good. ונמצא שהוא יחיד בכל פעולה ופעולה, ואינו משתנה על ידי פעולתו המשונות. And we find that the creator, or the essence of the creator, the emanator, whatever you'd like to call it, stays the same, stays singular, no matter what type of action he's doing, no matter how we see the action. And when everything's equal, he's called one. כלומר, אחד מורה על עצמותו יתברך, שנאצלו כל מיני ההפכים הם בהשוואת אחד. That oneness is talking about the essence of the creator. All is equal there. Remember, we talked about the endless, that everything is equal. There is no separation between anything. There's no big, small, great, lesser. None of that. Everything is equal. That's called oneness. And from there came everything that we see as opposites. But everything has its root in a place where there is no separation between anything. וכמו שאמר הרמב"ם, and like Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, or Maimonides, said, שאצלו היודע והידוע והמדע אחד הם. The person who knows, the knowledge, and the results from this knowledge are all one. כי מאוד גבוהו מחשבותיו ממחשבותינו ודרכיו מדרכינו. Because the Creator's knowledge is greater than ours, and His ways are greater than ours. Meaning, in our world, you have a person who knows something, is separate from the thing that he knows, is separate from all of the observations or logic that he goes and does out of that, which Mada literally translates to science. So, we have people that see things so they know what happens because they saw it, but not necessarily can they make all these logical things from it or do experiments on it and then come to a fact at the end. So all these entities are separate in our world. With the Creator, it's all one. בית הבחינות בהשפעה, מטרם שבא לכלל קבלה ולאחר שבא לכלל קבלה. So the last topic we're going to do today is there's two aspects to the receiving of things. There's before the actual receiving, and there's after it's been received. Go out and learn from those that ate the man, or the manna, meaning the food that fell from the sky for the Israelites while they were in the desert. Because it's called bread from the sky. משום שלא נתגשם בהתלבשותו בעולם הזה. Why is it called bread from the heavens? Because it did not materialize fully through the physical clothing of this world. ואמרו חז"ל, and our sages teach us, שכל אחד ואחד היה תואם בו כל מה שרצה. That every person who ate it tasted what they wanted to taste. ונמצא שהיה בו בהכרח מן הצורות ההפוכות. So if everybody tasted what they wanted to taste, that means that within it there had to be opposite flavors. Some people like spicy, some people like sweet, salty, bitter, sour. Everyone likes different things. So if everybody tasted what they wanted to taste, that means it had to have opposite flavors within it. One person tasted sweet, and somebody else wanted to taste spicy or bitter. The man itself, had to have both of the opposites together. Because nothing can give of itself what it doesn't already have inside. So if the man gave a sweet flavor, it means it had a sweet flavor inside of it. If the man gave a spicy flavor, it means it had a spicy flavor inside of it. How can you have two opposite things in one subject? שהוא פשוט ומופשט מבית הטעמים ורק כלול הוא מהם. So it has to be that it has both inside of it. באופן, what does that mean? שהמקבל הגשמי יכול להבדיל לעצמו הטעם הזה שרוצה. The physical receiver, the physical vessel, can differentiate what it wants. והדרך זה תבין כל דבר רוחני, and through this concept you'll understand every spiritual thing. שהוא בעצמו יחיד ופשוט, אמנם כלול מכל ריבוי הצורות שבעולם. It in itself is singular and simple, but it has within it all the different things that exist. ובביאתו ליד מקבל הגשמי והמוגבל, but when it arrives at the vessel, which is physical and bordered, it has its limits, אז יעשה בה המקבל צורה נבדלת אחת, then the receiver gives it its specific separate form, מכלל ריבוי הצורות, which makes it different from all the other forms, המתייחדות במהות הרוחנית ההיא, which are together when it's still in a spiritual context. ולפי זה יש להבחין תמיד בהשפעתו יתברך בית בחינות. Through this we have two categories of the shefa, of the sustenance or the light, whatever you want to call it, that comes down from the Creator. האחד היא צורת מהות השפע העליונה, the form of the existence of this sustenance, of this light, goodness that comes from above, while it's still up there, טרם ביאתה לכלל קבלה, before it arrives at the stage of being received, שעדיין הוא אור פשוט וכולל. It's still a simple, overarching light, meaning it encompasses everything. השני היא אחר שהגיע השפע לכלל קבלה, once the sustenance, the light, arrives at the vessel, שעל ידי זה קנה צורה נבדלת אחת וחלקית, לפי תיקונת המקבל. Then the light changes its form, or one form comes out of the light, to fulfill the desire of the receiver. Let's bring this down to something practical that we can take away into the week. Every single person gets exactly what they want. I know there's a song, you can't always get what you want. From a Kabbalistic perspective, the Creator, the universe, the essence of the Creator, whatever you'd like to call it, is constantly giving everything. What do we receive? Exactly what we're ready to receive. What are we ready to receive? Our desire. We've talked already about the desire being the exact measure of the vessel. So, if in a person's life things aren't going so well, they need to look inside. Why do they desire for this to happen? When things are amazing for a person, their desire is large. Their desire is for more. So what we're saying here is that the light, the giver, the essence of the Creator, is always the same. It has everything. what makes the difference is the vessel's down here. So when the Israelites ate the man in the desert, person who wanted sweet, their vessel, their desire inside their vessel was for sweet things. So that's exactly what they got. Because everything was already included in the man. Well, when was the differentiation? It's almost like by touching the vessel, there's this ID card, and then the light knows which packet to give. So that's how everything works. Whatever the vessel desires is exactly what it gets. Have a great week.